So allergy season is horrible in Texas. It starts with mountain cedar and it goes to elm, and they both hit at the same time this week. And and it hit me all at the same time on Wednesday afternoon. So I am sorry that I'm going to be at moments. So I feel like I have drank enough water, and I know y'all are in a drought, so I am sorry. So if Governor Brown says, who caused the drought? You could just say, the girl from Texas. But it is so exciting. And you know, when y'all were singing, and I'm going to stop saying y'all. When you guys were singing that last song, I was thinking back to 16 years ago. My dad was still alive at the moment, and I was about to leave for New York, and the song that they sang at my, I guess what you would kind of call a commissioning service, because I was about to enter the field of Jewish evangelism for the first time, we sang the traditional version of I Have Decided to Follow Jesus. And when my father went into ministry in 1973, they sang, I Have Decided to Follow Jesus. And I thought it was quite appropriate for you guys to sing that song, and I like the new version as well of I Have Decided to Follow Jesus. And how many of you know the backstory of the writing of the song, I Have Decided to Follow Jesus? Because it's really amazing backstory. It was written by an Indian believer in Jesus, an Indian from the subcontinent of India, who was a part of the upper caste, of the upper caste of India. And if you became a believer of the upper caste, you immediately went to the lowest caste of India. You went from the richest of the rich to the poorest of the poor. If you went from being a Hindu to being a believer in Jesus. So when he wrote those words, the cross before me, the world behind me, he was truly giving up everything to be a believer in Jesus. But he says, the cross before me, the world behind me, no turning back, no turning back. And for the last 16 years of my life, I've understood that song in ways that I've never thought possible. And I want to share that with you. And Laura's going to go, when are you going to tell me to turn a slide? I'll tell you in just a minute, Laura. I'm a Baptist preacher's kid. I'll get to that, okay? And but in the last 16 years, I have been able to do things I never thought I would get to do. The last time I was here, I had a few minutes with you. I had just returned from England, where I was able to speak at a conference in England. And I came out here to visit my great aunt, and my mother was here with me. And in the last 4.5 years since I've seen you guys, I actually had to write this down this morning so I wouldn't forget. The Lord has enabled me to be in Switzerland, Germany, Israel 3 times, Jordan, Ecuador, Canada, and Spain. And next Saturday, I'm going back to Israel again. And so God has enabled me to literally travel the world in the last 16 years. And yes, I've got to see amazing things and get to meet amazing people, but it's been for one purpose in mind, to share the gospel of Jesus with the people who first gave us the gospel. And the last time I was in Israel was last August, and that's when I took those 2 pictures. My mom was never able to go to Israel. My dad, who was a Baptist pastor, was never able to go to Israel before he died. But I was able to take my mom with me to Israel. I spoke at a conference in Jerusalem, and I made a deal with her. I'm going to admit to you now, I blackmailed her. She needed her knee replaced, and I had enough airline miles, and I said, Mom, if you get your knee replaced, because she was fighting me, I will cash in my airline miles and pay for your ticket. But if you don't get your knee replaced, I go to Israel without you. And so she was like, okay, I'll do it. And so I was able to take my mom to Israel. when I spoke at the conference in Jerusalem last August. And after the conference was over, we spent 3 extra days in Jerusalem and in the Galilee. And I took her to Haifa, where Mount Carmel was, or is, because my dad's favorite sermon was Elijah and the prophets of Baal. But anyway, while we were there, I took her to the Wailing Wall, to the Western Wall, and I took this picture. And then we went to the Catholic site of the crucifixion and the resurrection. And then, of course, we went to the Protestant site because Mom wanted to see that one more. But at the Catholic site, there is a cross leaning up against the wall. And I just thought that was a pretty picture, so I took that picture. But to me, this represents the whole story of the Jewish people. Because while we have the cross to look forward to and to look back on, and that is our hope, what is the Jewish people's hope? And that is represented in that young man that I snuck a picture of. Because it was a Sabbath, and you're not supposed to take pictures at the Western Wall on the Sabbath. But I watched this boy just stare at the wall. And it was evening, and the sun was setting, and the light was hitting the Western Wall. And it was just such a perfect picture that I looked around for those black hat rabbis, and I took a picture. And because it represents the Jewish people. We have a cross for our hope. The Jewish people today, if they believe anything at all, have a wall. What hope does a wall give us? But that's what the Jewish people have today. They have a wall. And that's what I've been doing for the last 16 years of my life, is saying, you don't have to have your hope in a wall. Because if you've ever been to Jerusalem, have you been to Jerusalem, ma'am? Okay, well, shame on you. Take her to Jerusalem. If you've ever been to Israel, I don't know how many of you have ever got to go to Israel, but if you go to Israel and if you go to Jerusalem, as you're going into the Western Wall area, there's a big sign that says that we believe that the presence of God resides in this wall. This is for the ultra-Orthodox, not the secular, but the ultra-Orthodox. We believe that the presence of God resides in this wall. Well, we know better. The Shekinah glory of God does not reside in that wall, but that's their only hope. That's why you see the ultra-Orthodox just praying and begging at this wall. And as I explained to Jean and Dave last night, that's why a very small portion of the ultra-Orthodox excuse me, are desperate to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And so they're desperately trying to rebuild the temple, a small portion, because that's where their hope is, in a wall. If you could go to the next slide for me, Laura. And so that is why, next slide. Okay, there we go. So that is why Tzedakah Ministries for this year and for coming years wants to give them a hope of knowing how to explore Messiah, to give them a journey of a lifetime and for an eternity. Because first Simon Peter, and I'll give you the whole verse later on. Thank you, perfect timing. But in your hearts revere Messiah. In the King James it says Christ, but the Hebrew word is Messiah. Revere Messiah as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this in gentleness and respect. Because we have a hope. We have the hope. And so how can we help the Jewish people today have the hope that we have? We have the cross, they have a wall. How can we help them to have the hope that we have? And so one of the things, and this is one of the purposes of Tzedakah Ministries, is to equip Christians in churches to know how to witness to the Jewish people, because I can't do it on my own. Because I live in Fort Worth, just in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and we have a large Jewish population, nothing like you guys. And I travel the world, but I can't reach all 15 million Jewish people in the world. You will meet as many Jewish people as I do, and you need to know how to witness to the Jewish people as well as I do. And you can, if you have the tools and the equipping to do it. Go to the next slide for me, Laura. And so because, and I don't know if you can see this, I should have made this bigger or different, but out of the 15 million Jewish people in the world today, only 1% know Jesus is their Messiah. Only 1%. And I want you to think about it. The people who gave us Jesus and Paul, and if any of y'all are my age or older, I want to say Peter, Paul, and Mary, but that makes it sound like a music group. Y'all don't know who that is. But some of y'all who like music will know who that is. I take that back. And some of y'all are going, huh? But Matthew and all the disciples and Abraham and all of the disciples and gave us the Bible. They don't know Jesus. How is that possible? But they don't. Because we have never told them. The gospel who was first given to them, John 4:22 says, salvation is from the Jews. But yet, somehow, it skipped them. And Romans 1:16 says the gospel is to the Jew first. But somehow they don't have it. But Romans 11:11 says that it is our job as non-Jewish people is to give the gospel back to the Jewish people. We're not doing a very good job of that. So how can we do it better and more effectively? Because Acts 17:6 says that when the world is turned upside down, you know who did that? The Jewish people. Because it was the Jewish people in Thessalonica who were turning the world upside down for the gospel. So go to the next slide for me, Laura. Because I want to give you some Jewish statistics. I'm not a math person. I'm a history nerd. But let me give you some Jewish statistics. Only 31 to 35% of Jewish people believe that religion is important to their lives. Only 11% of Jewish people believe that the Torah or the Old Testament is the literal Word of God. Only 37% of Jewish people are absolutely certain that God even exists. Now, Jean and Dave and Laura and I were talking last night until 1 o'clock Texas time, by the way, about a lot of different reasons for this. But can you imagine the people who gave us the whole gospel aren't even certain that God himself even exists? Because we have failed. Go to the next slide, would you, Laura? And only 17% of Jewish people turn to religion to make decisions of right and wrong. And only 41% believe in heaven, only 22% believe in hell, and 45% of Jewish people even bother to pray when life gets tough. Can you imagine not knowing that you can pray to God when your life gets tough? I want to give you an illustration. Not when I was with Mom, but the last time I was in Israel before I was with Mom, I was going through security, and for some reason, look at me, I was pulled over because I was suspected of possibly being a terrorist. I know I look dangerous. And so I was pulled over for possibly being a terrorist. And my suitcase was inspected. They discovered that I am the neatest packer that you could ever imagine, because I like things just so. And the young lady that was assigned to me, she had just finished her 2 years of service in the IDF. And so she was finishing her 3rd year at working at Ben Gurion Airport. So she looked at my suitcase. She goes, "Yeah, you're not a terrorist." But she was still given the duty to stick with me until I'm released to go to the gate. It's a long process at Ben Gurion. So we had 30 minutes just to talk. And so she was stuck with me. We talked about Jesus for 30 minutes. And so she asked me, "Why did you come to Israel?" I said, "Well, because I'm a Christian and I wanted to," and she goes, "Well, why'd you come by yourself?" And I said, "The last time I was here, I was with a church tour guide and I just got tired of seeing churches everywhere. I wanted to see real Israel." And she said, "Well, what was your favorite?" And, we just were having a conversation. And she said, "Well, do you pray to Mary?" And I said, "Well, no, I don't pray to Mary." She goes, "Well, aren't Christians supposed to pray to Mary?" And I said, "No." She goes, aren't you Catholic?" And I said, "No, I'm a Baptist." And she said, "Well, you said you're a Christian. Aren't all Catholics Christian? Aren't all Christians Catholic?" And I said, "No, I'm a Baptist." And so she goes, "Well, what does that mean?" I said, "I'm glad you asked." And so I got to walk her through what it truly meant to have a true relationship with Jesus. And, and I got to walk her through that, Mary, good woman, mom of Jesus, but she needed Jesus as her Messiah just like I do, just like she does, just like the whole world does. Mary's no different than any of us, except she was the mother of Jesus. And she's like, "Wow, I never heard that before." And as we were talking, she asked me more questions. But here's what I want you to hear about this young IDF soldier. Grew up in Israel, raised in Israel, surrounded by all of these Christian historical sites. Didn't believe in God. 80% of Israeli Jews, don't believe in God at all. Why? God wasn't there during the Holocaust. We built Israel without God. We don't need God now. And so as we were talking, I explained to her that, that having a faith in Jesus is not a religion, it's a relationship. And what my relationship with Jesus was truly all about. And she said, "No Christian I've ever met working at this airport has ever talked to me about Jesus the way you have." Now I want you to think about it. Imagine all the Christian tourists that go through Ben Gurion Airport. And I was the first one who's ever talked to her about Jesus. And as I was walking, and it was only because I got set aside for special terrorist screening. I was annoyed at first, but I realized it was God who wanted me to be a terrorist for 5 seconds. But we have to be equipped to be ready to give an answer for the hope that resides within us. And because they don't believe in heaven, they don't believe in hell, and they don't even know that they can pray. Can you imagine a life of that? But that's what they live with. Go to the next slide for me, Laura. Therefore, and this is just Amy writing, so you can ignore it. That is why in 2016, Tzedakah Ministries wants to give the Jewish people something to believe in. For the hope that they don't have and the hope that we do have. That's what Tzedakah Ministries wants to do. But that requires a lot of work. And I'm looking at my phone because I have all my little secondary notes written down. Because if you could go to the next slide. Because see, these are too small, so I'm going to read those for you. Well, they're too small for me because I'm starting to need reading glasses because my arms suddenly grown shorter. And because these are some of the big questions that Jewish people have about our faith as believers in Jesus. What do you mean about the incarnation? And by the way, do a lot of Christians understand what the word incarnation means? What is this that God became flesh and dwelt among us? Can God become man? Is that even possible? So what we're going to do over the next years, the DACA ministries, what we're going to do over the next few years is we're going to take the big 7 issues that Jewish people struggle with involving Christianity, and we're going to break it down and answer each of the 7 issues in such a way that they have no excuse but to say, Jesus is real, Jesus is Messiah, and my life can only have hope if we believe in him. And that starts with the incarnation. Then who is Jesus? Because there's a growing movement within Judaism to try to cast doubt on whether Jesus ever existed or not. Because we don't like Jesus, we need to cast doubt on whether Jesus ever existed or not. And you're like, wait, what? Some Jewish people are trying to say Jesus never existed at all? Yes. Well, where is that coming from? It's coming from the ultra-Orthodox. And what I mean by the ultra-Orthodox, that's the really, really observant guys, the guys in the black hats with the side curls, praying at the Western Wall all the time. Those are the guys who know that Jesus is the big issue. Jesus is the elephant in the room. That doesn't mean Republican. That just means he's the big issue in the room. And so they're saying, well, maybe if we just can convince people that Jesus never existed, we can just never have to deal with him. And how do I know? And another term for those guys are called anti-missionaries. How do I know about the anti-missionaries? Over the last year and a half, I've had to have alarm systems put on my home because they threatened to kill me. I've had to have, whenever I'm at my home church, I have to sit in front of a security guard because they threaten to come into my church and do me harm. But just this morning, I had to answer a text message from one of them because all I have shown back to them is love. And one of them is starting to ask me questions about the Bible that he never asked before. So you can pray for Mordecai. Because I refuse to answer hate back with hate, and all I would ever tell them is, you want me to die, but I love you. And I can't repeat some of the things that they said to me. I actually had to get the dictionary down to explain to Mom what they were saying to me. And all I would say back to them is, you hate me, but I'm praying for you. And so the next question is, what does it mean, Christianity? And then if Jesus is the Messiah, why did the Holocaust ever happen? And then is there a difference between the New Testament and the Hebrew Scriptures? No. Do you know that the New Testament is, if you took the references to the Old Testament out of the New Testament, there would be very little New Testament left. Our New Testament is full of Old Testament references. We are intertwined with each other. My dad used to say that the Old Testament points to the cross. The New Testament refers back to the cross. And then we have can I still be Jewish and believe in Jesus? Because they've been told over and over and over again, if you believe in Jesus, you're no longer Jewish. Can you imagine the pressure that is, especially if they had family members who died in the Holocaust? If you do this, then you've killed your grandmother again. If you believe in Jesus, you're finishing what Hitler started. And then finally, we can deal with the major prophecies of Isaiah 53 and Genesis and Psalm 22 and Genesis 3. but all of these are layered upon each other. Go to the next slide for me. Because can Jesus, I heard a woman once say, I go to a lot of events at the Dallas Jewish Community Center, and I know you have those here in the greater LA area, who once said that she was in an elevator once. Now I want you to think about this. She was in an elevator once, and a nice Christian woman saw her Star of David and said, you know, Jesus could forgive you for being Jewish if you would just believe him. Well, I want to tell this nice quote-unquote Christian woman, hey, Jesus was Jewish, is Jewish too. And at the Dallas Jewish Community Center, I had 2 Jewish women come up to me once and say, Amy, because they know who I am, they know what I do, and they let me come to the Dallas Jewish Community Center all the time because I'm respectful. And they came up to me I got to watch the clock. And they came up to me and they said, Amy, can we ask you a question? Now I want you to think where I live. I don't live in California. I live in Dallas. The buckle of the Bible Belt. You know, not just the buckle of the Bible Belt, but the pointy little part on the buckle of the Bible Belt. There are churches everywhere. I mean, there are Baptist colleges everywhere. There are seminaries everywhere. You can't go anywhere without beating back the Baptist. Okay? They are everywhere. I mean, and so these 2 Jewish ladies came up to me, both around my age, and they said to me, Amy, why do Christians hate us? And it was a sincere question. And I said, and I understood the root of the question, the Holocaust, the Crusades, the Inquisition, 2,000 years of Jewish history where they were told they were Christ killers. And so I prayed to Jesus really quick for an answer. And I said, I first want to say to you, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but I understand it. And I want to apologize for the Holocaust and the Crusades and the Inquisition and 2,000 years of Jewish history. I want to apologize for it all. But let me tell you about my Jesus. My Jesus is Jewish. My Jesus was born Jewish. He was circumcised when he was 8 days old. He had his bar mitzvah. He celebrated all the Jewish feasts. The night before he was crucified, he was celebrating Passover. The disciples were all Jewish. Paul was Jewish. The Bible that I read is a Jewish book. The New Testament was all written by Jewish believers. I believe Luke was Jewish, not Gentile, just so you'll know. And so everything about my faith is Jewish. And so you guys gave me Jesus so that I could go to heaven. And so I want to say thank you for giving me Jesus so I could go to heaven, not go to hell. And it's all possible because of a Jewish man named Jesus, a Jewish man named Paul, Jewish disciples, Peter, John, James, Matthew, I named them all that I could think of off the top of my head. And it's all because of you guys, so thank you for giving me Jesus. It's all because of you guys. Thank you. I get to go to heaven because of you. And by the time I was finished, because I gave you the Reader's Digest version, they all were like, and they said, we've never heard we've never heard Christianity explained to us that way before. But that's our faith. Our faith is not separate from Judaism. Our faith is the realization of Judaism. And that's what we need to share with the Jewish people. Go the next slide with me, and you can just go ahead because I've kind of already covered that. So how are we going to do this? How is the DACA Ministries going to do that? Well, we want to be socially relevant. And that's going to require a lot of work. And we're also going to be honest, but we're not going to be boring. So many times we make Christianity and a relationship with Jesus boring. Jesus is not boring. Stop making Jesus boring. I hate that. But we've got to do things the way we've never done it before. What are the 7 last words of a dying Baptist church? We ain't never done it that way before. We've got to stop doing that, and we've got to try. My dad, who died at 66 in 2000, said, our message must never change, but our methods must always be changing. And so that is what Tzedakah Ministries is going to do. Go to the next slide for me, Laura. So we got to be media-driven for a 21st century audience. Because I hate to tell you guys this, millennials, and there's a new term for the post-millennial generation. They got to name themselves, if you didn't know that. MTV let the post-millennial generation name themselves. They're called the Founders, or Generation Z, or Generation Zombie, if you will. But, hey, they're reading all those zombie books. I could call them that. But they don't read anymore. Everything is YouTube and internet. They don't read. So why are we writing books to reach them? It needs to be on the internet, and it needs to be sensory overload. Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. Not so much Facebook, because most of your kids will tell you they don't do Facebook anymore. That's for all of you moms. Snapchat and Meerkat and Periscope. But for older Jewish people, we can still write books, because some of us still actually don't like Kindle. I like the tactile experience still. But for everything else, it's got to be social media and internet driven and experiential, not boring. And workbooks and evangelistic tracks and ministry apps. Because you know how people do information now? This. We don't, how many of you, this is your Bible now? If this was Joel Osteen's church, nobody would raise their Bible anymore. We'd all be raising this. Even at my own church, this is my Bible. And so this is what we've got to do. We've got to be relevant, and we've got to be real. This week, before I left to come here, I spoke at a conference in Arlington, Texas, not too far from where Armando's going to go watch wrestling in a few weeks. And we call it Boss Hog Bowl, just so you'll know. That's where he's going. Or where the Cowboys go to die. And, hey, did you see my Cowboys this year? Tony Romo is going to become the $6 billion man by the time they get all the steel into him. And so you've got a football team now. We're losing our football team. It's sad. Anyway, but I spoke at a conference this year, and I'm 46, but I spoke at a conference there is, how can we make Jewish evangelism relevant to Christian millennials and founders and Jewish millennials and founders? That was my topic. Because you know what? I was one of the youngest people in the room. Because we've got to be relevant, or we're going to lose a generation. Not only of Christians, but also of the world. Go to the next slide for me, please. So how can you help? You can encourage me. You can encourage Tzedakah Ministries as I write these materials. As I learn how to write an app, because I'm still working on that part. You can be a prayer warrior, because I need prayer. I'm going to be honest with you. I actually called Mom. I don't know if you ever heard my phone conversation with my mom. I don't care if you heard. I'm flying back tonight on the red eye, and one of the reasons I'm flying back is I got to vote Tuesday. I get to vote before you guys do. I'm voting on Tuesday, but Tuesday morning and you can add this to your prayer request list. I'm going in for a biopsy on Tuesday morning too. But as I told a friend of mine, if the biopsy results aren't good, the next time you see me, I might be bald, but I'll still be doing Jewish evangelism. Because there's too many Jewish people who are dying and going to hell. I might be barfing and bald, but I'll still be doing Jewish evangelism because it's too important. So you guys can pray for me. And by the way, y'all are the first church to know about that, and I don't care. But you can pray about this, and if God leads, support us, because it's tough. Y'all know what it's like to be a church that struggles. I know that. All of us are struggling, but we need your help. Most of the time, a lot of Christians think that politics can solve all of the world's ills. And I'm going to vote on Tuesday. I'm not telling you who I vote for. But none of those guys can fix what's wrong with the world. There's only one person who can fix the world's problems, and he died on that cross 2,000 years ago. I have a couple of quotes, and I want you to, hopefully you can see them. If you can, I want you to see it. Woody Allen, some of us remember Woody Allen before he got really, really weird. He wrote, by the way, Jewish guy. Woody Allen wrote, "To you, I'm an atheist. To God, I'm the loyal opposition." That's a lot of Jewish people today. They don't know if there's a God, but if he's out there, they're really ticked off at him because of the Holocaust, because he hasn't shown up, because he's ignored them. One of my favorite TV shows, Laura knows this, and Jean and Dave know this, is Big Bang Theory. I confess. They like him too. I'm a cross between Amy Farrah Fowler and Wolowitz, okay, just so you know. Some of you know who that is too. Mayim Bialik, who plays the character Amy Farrah Fowler, is a Jewish woman. She's a modern Orthodox Jewish lady. She writes, "The concept of a Messiah is a general notion that we are partners in making the world better and moving the world forward." That's her idea of the Messiah. Because most Jewish people have even given up on the idea that the Messiah is a real person. Because he hasn't shown up for 3,000 years in their eyes. So why even bother believing he can be even coming at all? And then the last slide for me, Laura. This rabbi named Peter Schweitzer wrote, years ago, and I remember this campaign, a popular evangelical bumper sticker read, "I found it." You remember in the 1970s there was this "I found it" campaign? And people were supposed to ask you, well, what did you find? And that was your opportunity to share Jesus. The Jewish version would read, "I'm still looking for it." And that's where Jewish people are today. They're still looking for the Messiah, if they even bother believing in him at all. I have a friend, and with this, I'm going to be finished, Lincoln, and I'll let you finish however you want. I have a friend, and I know I've talked a lot about young creations today, but I have a friend. Her name is Agnes. She's 85 years old. She will not make it to 86. When she was 13 years old, she and her mother and her sisters and her grandmother, and there's no younger people in here, so I can be honest, were put on a train from Hungary to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Her sisters, her mother, her grandmother were all sent to the gas chambers the first night. The only reason why Agnes wasn't was while her sisters and her mother and her family all had brown eyes, she had blue eyes. That's the only thing that saved her. The guard said to her, "You're too pretty to go in that line. Go over there." That's all that saved her. Today she lives in Chicago. I went up to see her a few months ago. She won't make it to 86. When she was in the camps at 13 years old, she was forced to make munitions for the Nazis. That's how she survived. But being 13 years old and not quite fully developed, she developed a tremor in her left hand because to mess up was to die. And she didn't have the fine motor skill ability to quite do it right, but she was so afraid to mess up. She didn't want to die. So it created this uncontrollable tremor that she never has gotten rid of. Now at 85, it looks like she has Parkinson's. So she doesn't believe in Jesus yet. She was 83 years old when she got her very first Bible. How do I know that? I gave it to her. She never heard the gospel till she was 83 years old. Because I'm the one that told her. How is that possible? She's still looking for the Messiah. How is that possible? We, given the gospel, and the Jewish people are still looking for it. It's now our turn to give Jesus back. And that's my phone. Stop that. It's our turn to give it back.